Just Right for Trouble, an audiobook by Sharon Smith Palmer, produced by Sharon Palmer Books, read by Sharon Smith Palmer, copyright 2025. The year was 1940. There was war in Europe, but that little tiff didn't bother Andreas Papatus much. It was the other headline, the one above the fold, that caught and held his attention. Child kidnapped, the story read. Last Thursday, around 4 o'clock, 8-year-old Aurelia Getz disappeared outside her grandmother's home in Evanston, just north of Chicago. Eyewitnesses state a bear-sized man grabbed her off the street and dumped her in a panel truck before racing off with tires squealing. There have been no signs of the truck or Aurelia for 4 days. Neither has there been any report of a ransom note. The family is not offering a reward at this time. If you have any information, contact the town hall police station. Andreas dropped the open paper into his lap and stared out the window. Something was off. The parents were too relaxed and seemed at peace in the picture on the front page. The article stated they were anxious to get their little girl home safely, and their eyes said otherwise. It wasn't any of his business, but business was slow. Since there were no dames in distress banging on his door, he stuffed his worn fedora on his head and grabbed his overcoat. He hightailed it to town hall, determined to ask his buddies what they knew. It turned out his buddies didn't know much. Stocky interviewed the family. George talked to the witnesses. They described the suspect's vehicle as mostly white with a faded logo painted along the left side. It might have said Perlum for something, and there may have been a picture of a bear, but they weren't sure. The kidnapper was described as large and hairy, or large and wore a fur coat. Everything happened so fast, no one really got a good look. The police assumed fur was short for furniture, but finding a shop by that name was proving to be tricky. After talking with his pals, Andreas caught a streetcar heading east. As he rode through the city toward the suburbs, he mulled over the situation. His eyes passed over shop signs and vehicles coming from the opposite direction, while tidbits of the conversations with his buddies played on repeat. "She is a wee lass," Stocky had said, his Irish accent lending a lilt to his worry. "Wearing the plaid of the Queen of Angels school, a red ribbon in her golden hair, and her just 8 years of age, God bless her." "Why her?" Andreas had asked. Stocky shrugged. "No one knows." Andreas frowned. Through the streetcar window, the figure of a bear caught his eye. A white panel truck with a faded logo turned into an alley next to it. He leapt to his feet, yanking on the bell cord to alert the driver to stop. It felt like an eternity until the streetcar slowed enough for Andreas to jump to the sidewalk. He jogged the half-block back to where he saw the bear and the alley. Crossing the street, he stared up at the sign. Bearheim, Furriers and Taxidermy. The bear stood next to the door on its hind legs in a very realistic attack pose that unnerved passerbyers, including Andreas. He skirted around the beast, not taking his eyes off it until he rounded the corner of the alley. The alley itself was dark and dank, like every alley Andreas ever had the misfortune to visit. Andreas peered into the gloom. The van was nowhere to be seen. He investigated all buildings that had a window or open door as he made his way through piles of trash and detritus. The odor almost knocked him out. He breathed shallowly and raised a silent cheer when he peeked in a garage locating the truck. Squinting through the grimy window, it took Andreas a bit of time to decipher the faded logo. The police had it wrong. The kidnapper's truck didn't belong to a furniture store. He was 99.4% sure he had found the kidnappers. But had he found Aurelia too? He retraced his step to the front of the furrier shop, clearing his nose and scraping a particularly stubborn piece of gum off his shoe. He straightened his coat before entering. A bell jingled merrily as he stepped across the threshold, juxtaposed with the nightmare that greeted him inside. Animals posed in threatening positions, glared at him from every angle. His skin crawled with disgust. One lynx eyed him with such hatred he turned to run, only to discover that the lynx was not a display, but a large and despicable tomcat. As it lunged toward Andreas, he batted the feline with such force it landed with a howl and a thud into the open jaws of a taxidermied wolf. Without a glance backward, the cat shot out the door, leaving the wolf rocking on its base. "All right, you." A loud roar came from the rear of the store. "What you into now?" The light from the back room was blocked for a moment by what Andreas presumed was the mountainous proprietor of the establishment. As the man emerged into the showroom looking for the cause of the noise, bore down on Andreas, causing the private eye to backpedal toward the door. "What do you want?" The man's eyes seemed small for his face as he squinted at Andreas, who now was too terrified to move. Andreas cast around for anything to help him. Are you the proprietor? How much for this?" He pointed at the form of a squirrel with a jaunty poof of a tail posed on a tree limb. "Yes, I'm Jacob Bernheim, and it's $1." $1? The exorbitant price jarred Andreas from his fear. "Take it or leave it," the bear-sized man growled. "I'll leave it, but I'd still like to look around for a bit." He inched toward the back room, from where he heard the clinkings of spoons against bowls. The querulous voice of a child rose above all other sounds, including the deafening ones coming from traffic outside. "Where is my ice cream? I'm tired of porridge. You promised me ice cream if I was quiet for 5 minutes. I've been quiet for much longer than that." A squeaky voice pleaded with the child. "Why don't you take a nap for a moment? We'll go for ice cream later." "We'll go for ice cream later," the child said in a mocking tone, perfectly imitating the nasality in the man's voice. Andreas glanced at Jacob, who seemed to have shrunk in on himself as he stood defeated, staring at the back room. Tears formed at the edge of his eyes. "Quite a handful, is she yours?" Andreas ventured. Jacob shrugged. "I guess she is now," he muttered. Andreas caught a glimpse of blonde hair and a flash of red as the child moved around what he saw was a kitchen. "Is that?" he started, then stopped. "The biggest mistake of my life," Jacob finished. "Yes, it is. That little chit has been nothing but trouble since I picked her up." He turned to Andreas with an air of hurt. "Do you know her parents told me to keep her when I sent the ransom note? They created the monster and now they don't want anything to do with her." Andreas listened as Aurelia berated everything she saw. "You call that a bed? One side is too hard, the other is too soft. There's not a single part that is just right. And what about this chair?" Without thinking, Andreas entered the back room. On one side, a small hook-shaped man trembled at a table with a sink and cooktop behind him. 3 bowls sat on the table in front of him. The other side was filled by a bed big enough to sleep everyone in the room comfortably, and next to it a throne-like chair where a golden-haired child presided, a stormy and snooty look on her face. "And who are you?" she shrieked. "Another kidnapper? I hope you do a better job of it than these two." She sighed like a martyr. "Let's get on with it. Take me away." She held her hands out, expecting to be tied up. Both Jacob and his accomplice turned to Andreas and begged, "Yes, please, take her away." Andreas felt a pang of pity for the two. They seemed to have suffered far more than the kidnapped child. "If I take her away, who's to say you won't go out and kidnap another child?" he asked. They both vehemently shook their heads, almost knocking them together in their zeal. "Won't be making that mistake again," Jacob stated. "It ain't worth it." The hook-shaped accomplice bobbed his head in agreement. "We'll even leave town," he added. "Can we just get on with it?" Aurelia pouted. "My arms are getting tired, and I want to be somewhere warmer. It's too cold here." Andreas' decision to reach for his wallet was made by his heart rather than his head. He handed all of his cash to Jacob. "Get your van painted before you go," he said to the man. "Use the rest to get out of town. I'll take little Miss Sunshine here to the police station and drop her off." Their looks of disbelief at the rescuer turned to relief, and they both bobbed their heads in silent thanks. "You mean I have to go home?" Amelia pouted. Andreas took her arm and dragged her to the door. "Good luck," he shouted over his shoulder to the 2 men. To you as well, Jacob yelled back. Aurelia pouted and whined all the way to the town hall police station. By the time they arrived, Andreas's nerves were so frazzled he shoved the girl at the nearest officer and left without a word. The next day, the war in Europe made it above the fold. Below the fold was the story Aurelia told of how she had escaped her captors with the daring do of a swashbuckler. Her parents' faces in the accompanying picture were haggard and haunted. It served them right. The end.